yet with a steady beat. Have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers sighed? Welcome, and thank you for joining us as we do a deep dive into critical race theory here at Journey Church. During the month of February, our leadership team decided to look into and to adopt the theme of critical race theory as our theme for Black History Month. The team decided to do this based on our need and our desire and our willingness to create a platform to educate and to help our congregation and community, friends, and all those who look to Journey Church as a means of understanding the real meaning of critical race theory in the year 2022. This was also done because we realize there has been a lot of misinformation and disinformation throughout the country and even nationwide related to the understanding of how race and research and understanding of what critical race theory really means in our society. I'm thankful to each and every person that supports Journey Church, from our members to our regular attendees to persons that view and that share our weekly services each and every day. We thank you for your support. I thank you for your support in helping us be responsible in our mission to give access and to be a place where we can come to be educated around critical needs issues in our community. Not just in the month of February, but each and every month, 365 days a year. Solomon in the book of Proverbs said, "In all of your getting, in all of your getting, get understanding." In all of your getting, get understanding. It is critical that we understand the culture and the climate and the things that are shaping our lives each and every day. So what we've done is assembled a multi-generational panel of persons that will come and share with you out of their life experiences around critical race theory and other events that have impacted their lives. I am very excited about today because what we're doing today will live on beyond February, will live on beyond 2022. It will be a part of the historical record. So I encourage you to view it. I encourage you to share it with your friends, your family. I encourage you to make sure that generations view it, not just my generation, but generations younger than myself, generations that are to come with our youth, our teenagers, our young adult, even our children. We hope, and the goal is, that we will continue to shed light and to bring understanding and clarity to issues that affect us as it relates to race and living here in America. So let's get started. The definition that you will see and that we've used for critical race theory is that critical race theory proposes that any analysis of American society must take into account its history of racism and how race has shaped attitudes and institutions. I'll say it again. It proposes that any analysis of American society must take into account its history of racism and how race has shaped attitudes and institutions. You will hear more facts, and you'll be given more resources during this sharing and during this broadcast. One is, and I'll hit on it now, and you'll be hearing more as we continue. One is, a myth is that critical race theory, also known as CRT, is being taught and being pushed in public schools and in public school curriculum. But the truth and the facts are that critical race theory is not taught in any single K through 12 school. It is taught mainly on college and graduate school levels. I'm thinking in my mind that a lot of what the pushback is that whenever you confront society, whenever we are confronted with those things that we have not done well, there's always a resistance to take responsibility for our own action. So as an individual, as a pastor, as a father, you who are viewing as mothers, fathers, husbands, wives, children, youth, all ages, we have a responsibility to be accountable for all of our actions. Stay tuned. We're taking a deep dive here at Journey Church into critical race theory. I thank you for viewing.
Hello, I'm Mary Johnson, and I'm here with Miss Betty Mack. It's good to see you, Miss Betty.
Hello there, Mary. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Wonderful.
We are going to talk about critical race theory, and Miss Betty is a part of the Silent Generation, and she'll be sharing with us how systemic racism, how the legal system, how the political system played a great part in her life as she was growing up, her life as an adult, and also her life as a grandparent. Ms. Betty, could you tell us some about the place that you grew up?
Okay. Well, Mary, I grew up on Paulus Island. That's in South Carolina. And it's a beautiful place. The blacks lived on the mainland section, and the whites lived on the eastern side. The Highway 17 divided the two groups.
Okay.
So we had very little contact with the whites unless we worked over there as their domestic helpers. Of course, I did work over there one summer as a domestic, and this was a family from Columbia. And believe it or not, they had a son who was my age. We were both in the same grade, and we often would sit around and talk about school and some of the subjects that we took. And one day, his mother said to me, "Betty," the young man's name was John, "will you tell Mr. John," I said, "to come here?" And I knew right then she was drawing the line.
And I could imagine that there were other things in Paulus Island that not even when it came to the schools, but there were other things that were totally segregated. Mm-hmm. And critical race theory that we call CRT is an effort to educate people about that kind of racism, but also to shed light on how that worked during your time and then projected on future generation. When was the first time that you heard of the term critical race theory?
Well, really, Mary, I'm just beginning to, maybe in the past 10 or 20 years, because I taught school for 50 years, and I never once brought this up. But then, after hearing about it, it's real. And it was real in my day, because I can think of the times, maybe that job that I worked for on the beach, I probably made less than $1 a day. But that family had wealth, and they had wealth that they could pass on to the next generation. John inherited, but had money to inherit from his family, but I didn't, because they already had the money, and they made sure that our salaries were low enough so we would not be able to accumulate much.
Okay.
So that's one thing I see there.
And you talked about being an educator.
Yes.
So speak to us just a little bit, knowing that you grew up in such a racist environment like many of us did.
Yes.
How did you manage growing up in an area that was so segregated, but getting what you needed and having the aspiration for higher education?
Well, one thing, I was really, really blessed. I had the teachers that I had and the community that I had were people who pushed and encouraged. They would say, we spoke Geechee, get that education. Because to get that education, they can't take that from you. So they pushed us and they encouraged us to always work hard and do the very, very best that you could. They wanted our generation to be sure and do better than the present generation. So we were always encouraged to study hard, work hard, and do the very best. When I got to high school, the thing that I still remember and thank God for this day is, growing up, there were 2 churches in my community, a Baptist and a Methodist. And if you were Methodist, you went to Allen University. If you were Baptist, you went to Morris College. I ended up at South Carolina State College, and to this day, I don't understand how I got there because I didn't apply. I simply remember a guidance counselor coming to my house one Saturday morning, taking me to Orangeburg to take an entrance exam. The next thing I knew, I was accepted with a scholarship. So those were I've always said, God just put the right people in my path at the right time.
Wow.
And that's.
Isn't that wonderful? Mm-hmm. I know you spoke about John and that occurrence of racism, but during your tenure as an educator, what was your first experience of racism then, and how did that affect you?
Well, I came to Columbia and I worked at Waverly School, and we had, in the school systems, everything was segregated. And then I think around 1970, we integrated the schools and I was sent to an all-white school. And I can remember to this very day, we were talking about slavery in the class. And this little child, in all innocence and just as sweetly as she could, she said, Miss Mack, but you see, we did them a favor when we brought them, because see, they were over there in Africa running wild and not wearing clothes and eating all those wild things. And she really didn't mean any harm, but that was the way some whites, I guess, saw us. That they did us a favor to take us away from our land, treat us as slaves, and it was a favor.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Now, you have 2 daughters.
Yes.
And a portion of the time you raised them alone because your husband...
Yes, I was widowed at age 42.
At an early age,
yes.
Wasn't it?
Yes.
Now, coming from the silent generation of better to be seen than heard, how did that play over into your parenting style for your daughters, and how did you prepare them to advocate against racism and to be able to deal with racism?
Well, I encourage them to speak up and speak out more, because, see, we were taught sometimes to just remain silent, never rock the boat, let things go. But I encourage them, when you go to school, speak up, speak out. If you have a problem with an adult, hesitate in what you're saying, and then let me come in and we'll meet with the teacher. I didn't want them to have a problem with teachers or older people. I wanted them to respect their elders, but also speak up and speak out a little bit more than I did during my time.
Doing your
Yes.
And I would imagine too, because you have a grandson,
Yes.
that you would be concerned about the ongoing problem of systemic racism.
Yes.
If you could change something even for today that would have a positive impact on yourself, because although you're from the silent generation,
Yes.
you still got many years to live.
Yes.
And for your daughters and your grandson, if there would be one thing that you could advocate and you would love to see change today, what would that be?
Well, especially when it comes to my grandson, I would really love to see law enforcement change. Now, I'm not saying that we have all bad law enforcers, but I'm one of those persons. I have had that talk with my grandson. You know, my grandson is tall, he's big, and I've said to him, son, if you ever stop, sit and not say a word and be very obedient, and we'll handle things afterwards. I would like to see our boys have a little more freedom in dealing with law enforcement. You know, so many times our boys especially may commit a small crime and they go in and they serve time for it. And on the other hand, because of the good old boy system, a white boy may go and commit that same crime. He gets a pat on the hand, and nothing happens, and he does not have a record. But on the other hand, my child would have a record. I would like to see that change, especially when you give those children records so early in life for something that's minor. And if it's not equal, now if it's equal, I could accept it. But if it's not equal, I think it's very unfair, and I'd like to see that change.
Well, thank you. One last question as we wrap up this interview. Describe to us what your most chilling experience of racism was, and how that shaped you for the rest of your life.
The most chilling. We got on the back of the buses.
Yeah. Speak up. It's okay if you think out loud.
No, I can't think of the most, because, you know, it was more so than being chilling. It was almost like a slap in the face, having to get on a Greyhound bus, pay the same fare, and go straight to the back. And then I also remembered when I graduated from college in 1960, and the civil rights fights was just really getting started.
Right.
And when a lot of my friends, I have to be honest, when they protested, when they sat at the counters, I stayed in the dorm. I was afraid. I was not a fighter. I did not go. I didn't march. I didn't protest. And we had made a decision at school: when you leave to go home on school vacations, be sure and sit in the white reading rooms. Well, I didn't do it. I was always afraid.
And well, thank you for sharing
If
that.
I had to do it all over,
that was going to be my question.
if I had to do it all over, I would boldly sit in that waiting room. I would boldly sit at the front of the bus, but not then.
What a great note to end on. And I have known Miss Betty for quite a number of years now. And if I could surmise, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but my impression of you is that while you did not literally sit in the white waiting rooms or sit at the front of the bus, that in later years, because there's always more than one way to protest and advocate, and I see you, and that's one of the reasons we're interviewing you, as a matriarch that has done in a lot of different ways, have advocated for her fellow man and have stood up. And for that we say thank you, and we pray that you continue to be able to advocate, stand up, and as the educator you are, teach others to do so too. Thank you so much,
And
Ms.
thank
Betty,
you,
for
and
this
thank
interview.
you for your time, Miss Mary. Thank you.
Greetings. I'm Pastor Quick, Associate Pastor, Journey Church, and I'm one of the moderators for the discussion on critical race theory and the effects of racism by generation.
Greetings. I'm Pastor Mary, and I'm with the pastoral ministry and counseling ministry here at Journey Church, and I am your other moderator. We are so glad to have this panel of generations with us. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves by giving us their name, the generation they represent, what they do, and when did they hear about critical race theory, and just in general, what does that term mean to them? So your name, the generation you represent, what do you do professionally or socially, and when did you hear about CRT and what it means?
Hello, my name is Jerry Mackey. I'm retired. I'm a former staff person with the General Board of Church and Society and the General Board of Global Ministries of the United Methodist Church. I worked for the church for 36 years at the national and international level. I'm one of the baby boomers, and so that puts me in a very special place, simply because I was in the midst of a lot of things that happened that are related to critical race theory. Now, I never heard it put that way before, or called that, let's say it that way. However, in listening to the definition, I'm a living example of what it means that this must move forward for everyone to understand what CRT means. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Overture Walker. I am an attorney here in Richland County, and I practice law statewide. I am also a member of Richland County Council. I've lived here in Richland County now for well over 30 years. I'm married. My wife and I, we have a daughter by the name of Zara Walker, and she attends E.L. Wright Middle School, and so we are, raising a young African-American daughter in public schools at the time that this issue of critical race theory, at least the debate around it, has gained traction around the country. And as someone who was a history major in undergrad and someone who went to law school, the issue of critical race theory is somewhat a little personal for me. I was born in 1980, so that makes me a Gen Xer, and I can tell you that growing up in the 80s was a delightful time. And I know with my generation, we sort of got lulled into a false sense of security with respect to the issue of race, because we would see images, black and white images, that is, on television from the marches in Selma and Birmingham, the March on Washington. And we thought, that was a thing of the past until some events took place, probably going into the early 90s. With respect to what critical race theory is to me, I view it just as the study of the role of race or racism in shaping America's institutions, or I think more simply put, is whether it's the belief in the inferiority of black folks in shaping the institutions here in the United States, whether it be economic, whether it be political, as well as social. But this false belief that there is something wrong with, or there's something inferior about our African American people, and how that belief permeated our institutions and still remains with us today.
Good afternoon. My name is Ashia Myers. I am a part of the millennial generation, so my generation is to thank for the ever-present internet in all of our lives. I am currently an employee with Richland County government. I work in government administration. I see a lot of the policies that shape how our local government impacts our life. As a part of the millennial generation, we also are uniquely placed as we are a very active and vocal generation. Critical race theory has been a daily part of my life because I had parents who made sure I understood where I stood in the eyes of society as an African American woman. I had the opportunity to concentrate specifically in my English major on literature of colonized peoples, so this wasn't something that I was unfamiliar with once it gained traction in the public as a debate and its place in our public school systems. I see critical race theory as absolutely necessary to frame how we as individuals interact with the systems that govern us, with the systems that push our economy, and how we interact with one another and view one another as individuals based upon skin color.
Good afternoon. My name is Brian Wilson. I represent the Millennial Group. I am a district training supervisor for Penske Truck Leasing, so I travel around the state. Been married for 12 years, and I have 3 children, one of which is biracial. Critical race theory for myself is just more so being able to identify where we stand as a people and the misinformation. I just realized that it was actually called that. So through this whole series, that's when I really realized that critical race theory, that's what it was called, and where we lie as far as a people in itself, and the misinformation and the information that they're not giving us in the workforce, in schools and things of that nature. So growing up, more so on, I would say, the Caucasian side of town, my mom, my grandmother really input a lot of influence on, you know, being a strong black male growing up, and how we lie in society and how we are looked at different and will be treated different as we grow. So focus on education and building relationships and rapport and just having an understanding of me being a male in America.
My name is Josiah Green. I'm a full-time high school student and an entrepreneur, and I am representing Gen Z. I've always heard about the critical race theory, but I just never heard, that specific term. But my parents always instilled in me, like everyone else has been saying, how, growing up African American, sometimes we do get treated, well, not sometimes, but a lot of times we do get treated differently just based on our race. And so, yeah, like I said, I just always heard about it, but I never heard the specific term.
Thank you all for sharing that and introducing yourselves. There have been several studies over the years that have come up with defining key characteristics that represent each generation. I'm going to share with you, by your generation, some of those characteristics, and I want you to tell us whether or not you are defined by those characteristics. And if you're not, we want you to let us know how you would describe yourselves, because we know that these characteristics are generic, and we want to know how you see yourself, your characteristic as African American living in a nation that's dominated by European American race. We'll begin with the baby boomer. Jerry, the characteristics from the study that describe your generation are committed, self-sufficient, competitive, and restless.
Well, fortunately, I don't have to go too far away from this. This is exactly who we are. Committed. I think as those of us who look back on our history, we can see that the young people in particular at that time, as well as older folks, were, of course, committed. You can see it out in the street, doing the things that needed to be done, self-sufficient. I had a mother who always said to me, make sure you have your own money and you can fend for yourself no matter what happens. Always be self-sufficient. Competitive. We had to be competitive because we always had to be a step above, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps above anybody else when applying for jobs or anything else. And restless, yes, we were restless. And I think that restlessness gave forth a victory to where we are today. Thanks.
Thank you. Overture for Generation X, the defining characteristic for your generation include resourceful, logical, and good problem solvers.
I would concur with those characteristics. Being resourceful or figuring out ways to solve a problem, being logical, thinking things through. I would say maybe circumspect, where you're not just thinking things through, but you're also concerned about the impact or the outcome and being good problem solvers as well. I believe that my generation enjoyed the benefit of being resourceful, logical, and good problem solvers because of the things that Ms. Mackey's generation now had to endure as well. When I have conversations with my mother, whether it's about parenting and things of that nature, she likes to say, well, we couldn't do it that way during, when she was growing up. But again, that's because, there were things that I believe that she had to endure that our generation didn't have to endure so much. Or as we often say, we stand on, broad shoulders, if you will. So I certainly agree with the assessment. And I think that also has more so to do with probably more folk from my generation having the opportunity to go off to college, get the white collar jobs, the jobs that pay a little more. And one of the things that I know I discovered is that when you have more economic resources, you have the luxury of being a little more logical, being able to, sort of solve problems a little more, being a little more resourceful. So yeah, I certainly agree with those characteristics as defining Generation X.
Thank you. And Ashia and Brian, the characteristics that describe the millennials are confident, curious, questioning authority, sociable, and prefers coaching to traditional supervision.
I would agree with those characteristics. I do believe that questioning authority is slightly negatively connotated, but I believe our generation was a generation that saw that the system in place were not working for everyone, that it benefited a certain subset of individuals, and that there was a need to question it, to say that there's a way that things can be done better, and why does it have to be this way? So I would agree, but I would like to remove the negative connotation often associated with questioning authority. I do believe that we're also confident because our generation has been accused of being the participation trophy generation. So we were the generation that was taught, you can do it, you can try, and even if you fail, you still at least tried. So I would agree with most of those things.
Well, I agree also, but as far as the questioning authority, it was more so based off of just having an understanding. So as far as it being like a negative aspect, I do not agree with the whole questioning authority as it relates to something negative. But being confident, I do agree with that. Curious, self-sufficient, sociable, we ultimately created social media. So, just being able to really input our outlook on life, put it on the internet, advertise it, and be able to really verbalize and be vocal about what's going on. As far as prefers coaching and traditional supervision, I do agree with that also.
Thank you. And Josiah, the characteristic that describes Generation Z are ambitious, vocal, confident, opinionated, has a global perspective, values authenticity and individual expression, expects diversity in life experiences, entrepreneurial, and activist.
Yes, I definitely agree with all those characteristics, especially the expects diversity in their life experience, because I feel like my generation is a lot more open to different ideas than the older generations. a lot of things that people don't like to talk about, but like I don't want to get into a lot of it, but they're a lot more open to ideas, like I said, that older generations aren't. So I definitely feel like we expect diversity.
Thank you. We didn't share with you the generation that we're in. I'm a baby boomer. Pastor Quick.
And I'm Gen X. All right, so 1986, I was in one of my science classes, and we were watching the launching of Space Shuttle Challenger. And I was so excited because there was Ronald McNair, who was on that shuttle, was from Lake City, and I went to school in the PD area, and he went to North Carolina A&T, which was a HBCU. So I was so excited, and all of a sudden, it just went up in flames. I could almost see the whole setting that day, and it affected me even today, because I was cheering for him. There are major events that occurred during each generation. There are a few events, if you'll see on here, for your generation. Then I want you to choose one event and tell us how that event impacted your life from the perspective of racism through legal systems and policies. And so we're going to invert the order. So Josiah, you're going to get the opportunity to go first.
Okay, the topic, the major event that I'm going to focus on is the gender equality. That's definitely affected my life positively because, back in, I'm going to say the baby boomer area, women were supposed to, just stay at home, be stay-at-home mothers, and work for their husbands, or basically relying on them. But in my generation, I feel like we're definitely more equal to men, because we are allowed to work on our own. Some women even prefer being on their own. So I definitely feel like that major event has affected me positively.
So I would go off of diversity, just more so like in the workplace now and just in general. It seems like, they're taking more of an initiative to implement or have more people of color in different positions, just in general. When it comes down to the workplace, when you're talking about school, positions of power, it seems as though now it's more so of a requirement to have someone of color in a role. It's like they're trying to maybe even meet quotas or something like that. It's like, well, we have four folks of European descent, and we're going to just throw that one, that African American or that one person of color in there. So I think now is that they're starting to see the importance of having people from different backgrounds and just clear overall understandings to put them in a role together. Everybody can pretty much put their minds together, for a better impact. But diversity has been one thing that I've really noticed that everyone is really trying to implement just in life.
All right, Ashia?
I guess I will go with a childhood with the internet and regular presence of cell phones. It opened the door for global communication on a different scale. I am old enough to remember where the only means you had to communicate anyone was just a telephone, a landline, and there were charges for long distance phone calls. And now I also got to see the rise of cell phones. Granted, when we first started, you had the briefcase cell phone that you had to plug into your car. And I've grown up all the way to now where you have literally a computer in your pocket and you can talk to anyone, anywhere, at any time. And what that did was open the door to have conversations with individuals you may have never had the ability to have a conversation with. With the regular presence of the internet, you were able to see how other people lived and operated in the society in which you also lived and operated. You weren't just limited to your local community or your state, or if you were lucky enough to travel, just your country. You got to see life in other countries. You got to see practices in other societies, and it helped then shape an ability to discuss things that we knew were wrong, but we didn't have the ability to fully say why it was wrong or how things were unequal, and it gave us the ability to do so in a much more clear and concise manner than before.
All right, Overture, Gen X.
Well, there would be 3 moments for me, but 2 out of the 3 are not on the list. But let me start with the one that is on the list, and that would be hip-hop culture. I'm an 80s baby, and so, growing up, I would hear, music that my granddad or my uncles and aunts would play, Al Green, James Brown, Jackson 5, and so on, which was great music, and much of that music formed the foundation for hip-hop, which followed in the late 70s throughout the 80s. But it was listening to various hip-hop artists or groups like Public Enemy, NWA, KRS-One, and other socially conscious rappers, and Queen Latifah and MC Lyte. I forgot we're coming off for International Women's Day, but they were very influential in the genre as well. But it actually sort of roused my conscience, my social conscience, if you will. I didn't know anything about the crack epidemic until I watched the Public Enemy video, the crack epidemic rather, that ravaged many inner cities and communities of color back during the 80s, which I think was a precursor to the opioid epidemic that we've been debating within the past few years that has ravaged Appalachia, America. And then with groups like NWA, I didn't know anything about police brutality until I watched some of their videos on television. And then, of course, the other 2 events that are still seared in my memory from growing up would be the LA riots of 1992, when Rodney King was brutalized on the roadside by a group of LAPD officers. And again, a kid at the time who was just 11, 12 years old, and who had been lulled into a false sense of security back in the 80s, thinking that we had put our past behind us and the days of marching and saying we shall overcome were over. Well, that was an eye-opener for me, to see that video on television, but then also to actually see Los Angeles go up in flames. And then, of course, we get to the O.J. Simpson trial, which came on the heels of the Rodney King fiasco and the L.A. riots in 1992. I was in high school when the O.J. Simpson verdict came down, and I can remember people cheering. My fellow white counterparts or classmates, they were upset about the verdict. And I remember seeing my fellow black classmates cheering about the verdict. And so for the first time, I was put in a situation where I could just, it was, the racial tension was just, it was very palpable. And so that stayed with me. And so, those would be the, 3 moments from, my childhood and teenage years that have impacted me the most.
Well, I looked at all 19 of the major events that shaped my personality, and all 19 of them were listed there. But I'm going to talk about probably 2 in particular. One's related to the desegregation of schools. I'm an Army brat. My father was in a segregated Army and then moved into when desegregation happened within the Army. So, of course, we moved every 2 or 3 years. And it meant a different school for my sister and I constantly. Every 2-3 years, we'd be in a different school. We lived in France for 5 years where my father was stationed. While we lived in a little French town, the base itself is where we went to school. And in the 2nd grade, there was a Christmas play that was happening, and the baby Jesus was to be born, and they needed some angels. And so my sister and I volunteered to be angels, and my teacher told me there was no such a thing as black angels. And so I was trying to figure that out. I knew there had to be, so I went home and I told my mother, and she was a real key factor in helping shape my personality of standing up for myself and learning to know that being a confident woman and a confident black woman was very important. Because you see, my mother looked like she was white, but she wasn't. And she never claimed to be. And she married the darkest man that she could find. And so consequently, we were always subject to a lot of different kinds of racial hatred, discrimination, and other things. She went to the school, and I brought the picture with me, but my sister and I ended up being angels with the rest of the little girls who were to be in that play for our school. The other desegregation piece I wanted to speak to is Dreher High School. I was with the first 30 students, black students, who attended Dreher. South Carolina in 1960s, late 60s, was getting ready to lose their federal money. And so they had to desegregate, and that didn't sit well. And so 30 of us got rezoned. I lived over near what used to be called Valley Park. I believe it's Martin Luther King Park now. And they took 2 or 3 from here and there and sent us over to Dreher. All the while now, I had gone to W.A. Perry, which is all the way across town from me, even though Han Junior High, which was the white junior high school, at that time they called them junior high, was 1 street over. So when I ended up at Dreher, it was quite an experience. And I was the first black girl in the beauty pageant during my senior year, running for Miss Blue Devil. And so we're all standing on the stage, and when the curtain came up, the whole audience said, it was like one large gasp, and I knew that it was for me. But my mother had dressed me so beautifully and had my hair and everything. I mean, it was fantastic. So I walked down the runway, turned around and walked back. And as I think about when we had our question and answer period, Strom Thurmond's wife, she wasn't his wife at that time, but she was one of the judges. So when they were asking the girls the questions, they skipped over me. And when they skipped over me, my friend Trina, one of my white friends, Trina, she said, "Excuse me," she said, "but you didn't ask Jerry a question." And she said, "We didn't intend to." So for me, it was, okay, that's fine, that's the way this goes. But again, the next year, a young black lady won. So it worked out okay. But the desegregation of schools for children at that age was a real mental hellhole to be in. I don't know how the persons who now say they don't believe we should even talk about critical race theory and how it has impacted people say that. I think that they say it out of guilt. It's difficult to hear how bad you've been. Even when you're a little kid, you don't want to know how bad you've been. But somehow, I have hope because of young people who now love diversity and expect to see diversity. It's really my age group that's still trying to hang on to some things that don't even matter anymore. So I would say that the desegregation of schools was something that really shaped and formed my life and kept me on the straight and narrow.
Thank you, and that is a great segue into our next question, which will be about educational opportunities and challenges. So we will look to hear from everyone, and we can hear from you again as well, Jerry, at that time. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to interview Ms. Betty Mack from the Silent Generation. And there was just so much she wanted to share that there were some things she didn't get to share during the interview. So we talked afterward, and one of the things that stuck out to me is that she shared with me that when she's a retired educator, when she was preparing for graduate school, she said that there was a master's degree program in education at South Carolina State University, well, college at that time, but there was one course that was required that was not offered in their program. So she applied to the University of South Carolina, so did several other students. She said they were not accepted, but the State Department of Education paid their tuition and their transportation to go north. So she graduated from the University of Colorado. She and several of the students did not allow that to deter them. So they went north in order to obtain their master's in education. So I'd like to hear from you all what kind of challenges and opportunities of education during your generation, and what changes do you think should be made today in our educational system so that all students will be treated fairly, regardless of race? In any order.
I'll take it, I guess. I had the opportunity to go to college on a full academic scholarship. I attended the University of Florida. My mother is HBCU educated. My father is educated by a PWI, a predominantly white institution. He has 2 masters. My mom has all but 1 year of her master's degree. So I came from a college-educated household. My mother was the first in her family to go to college, and she also desegregated her high school. So there was no choice for me but to go to school. The only caveat I had is I did not want to go to school in the state of South Carolina. Having parents who were very educated and who were also very involved in terms of social activism from a standpoint of letting me know where I stood as a young black woman, there wasn't any other choice available. I had to go to college, and I understood that, and I worked very hard. I graduated in the top 5 people of my high school class and got a National Merit Scholarship to attend any school I want to go to, and I chose the University of Florida. But I can remember getting ready to go to college. Every parent takes their child to Walmart to get supplies, and standing in line with my father, and there was a white gentleman behind us, noticed what was in our cart and said, "You must be going to school." And me being excited, yes. He said, "Well, where are you going?" And I told him where I was attending, and he said, "Oh, that must cost a lot of money." And me being proud of my accomplishment said, "Well, I got a full ride." And the first thing he asked me was, "Well, what sport do you play?" And it deflated some of my excitement, and I understood that the question came from a place, well, as a young black woman, you can't be smart. You got a full ride because you must be fast, or you must jump high, or you must run far, because black people have been relegated to athleticism and not having any other abilities to take them beyond their life if they are not gifted in some type of way with sports. And so it was a keen reminder of, yes, we've come far, but we've not come far at all, because there's still this misconception that the only way a black person can make it, quote unquote, is to be some sort of entertainment, to have some sort of entertainment value to society. And it was just a reaffirmation of the mission that my family gave me, that you have to work hard. You go to school, you study, you give 110%, and you make not just yourself proud, but your family proud, your community proud, and ultimately be an example that black people are so much more than their athletic or their entertainment ability. And I took that, and I worked hard to graduate undergrad early and then go to graduate school and graduate with the 3.98 GPA, because I understood the value of education and that there was no other option for me.
Sure. So, well, let me just add a different layer to this. I'm not an expert, in educational policy, and I'm not going to pretend to be one here, this afternoon. But this is what I would say with respect to the educational piece. I view, far as a child's performance in school, oftentimes it's tethered to their socioeconomic background or their economic condition. That's not to say that you can't rise above your conditions. There's always an exception to the rule, but no one goes into any situation, or no one goes into business and you don't take probabilities into account, and I deal in probabilities. I was that kid, who struggled early on academically, and the reason for my struggles was, my mother was a single mom. She had been married, she had gotten divorced, actually dropped out of college, got divorced, moved back to Sumter, South Carolina, and we lived with my grandmother, my grandfather. My grandmother, in fact, was a domestic in the Jim Crow South. My grandfather was a day laborer who had grew up as a sharecropper. So between the two of them, I think there was maybe a 3rd grade and 4th grade education. And then we lived with uncles and aunts. There were about 11 of us that lived in a 2-bedroom, one bathroom, cinder block home. And if you know anything about a cinder block home without central air or heat, it's too hot in the summertime, it's too cold in the wintertime, and the temperature is never temperate. My mother continued to work and go to school. She went to the local technical college in the evenings, and she worked during the day. In fact, she went to work after she got my brother and I off to school in the mornings. By the time she made it home in the evenings from school, Mom was too tired to deal with two small boys who were just being boys, if you will. And so my brother and I both suffered academically during those early years. Mom remarried, maybe around 86, 87. That's when we relocated to Richland County. And my stepfather, or my father, who's the one that raised me, he had a job at the United States Postal Service. And that job got us into the middle class. And so we moved into an environment, we moved from an environment, rather, of economic instability into an environment of economic stability, an environment of structure, an environment with boundaries. And that impacted the way that my brother and I performed in school. And fast forward 30-something odd years later, and I'm sitting at this table as an attorney, but also as a member of Richland County Council. So for me, when we start talking about what do we do to improve educational outcomes for our children, I look at least the source, at least where we ought to start rather, is with economic development, being deliberate about how we steer jobs into areas that have been overlooked or that are disadvantaged. What do we do in the way of workforce development as far as getting folks in our communities the skills and knowledge that they need to compete for jobs that pay a living wage, which then provides them the resources that they need to ensure that their kids or their children are at an advantage and are prepared to learn when they go to school.
The question is, share with us what educational opportunities and or challenges that affect your generation, and if you could change something so that all students would be treated fairly regardless of race, what might that be?
Okay. I definitely feel like there are a lot of opportunities, kind of like what he was saying on one question about how they have to have an African American in a spot, kind of, just to kind of show diversity. But I feel like although it does kind of feel, a little bit weird, it has brought me a lot of opportunities, because when I am put in a position to, be that representation for the African American community, I make sure I show out and show up. So it, brings us into that positive light as much as I can. And I feel like something that I would change in the education part of it is definitely us learning about our history. A lot of this stuff that we're talking about now, it's not taught in schools. I've never heard more than, about the slavery and just that aspect. I haven't heard anything positively besides what my African American teachers would teach us. But textbook lessons, never heard anything about us in a positive light. That's what I would change.
I went to Howard University, and I would say that coming from the experience that I had at Dreher High School, I was just standing in the middle of the street with my mouth hanging open. I'd never seen that many black people at school in my entire life, and it was, I think, a very nurturing time. As I look back on those years now, I began to wonder, why are our schools still struggling? Why are the HBCUs still struggling, however, financially and other ways too? But to know that they're getting more exposure now, and people, especially some of my white friends, they're like, I didn't know that. I didn't know there was I didn't know that was a school. I didn't know they had a school. I didn't, and I'm looking at them like, you didn't? How could you not know? Look at me. So I get a little confused sometimes as an older person in these days, this day and age, when I began to see some of the things that are impacting our young people with the violence and the drugs and some of these other pieces, and yet I know that even before I was born 69 and a half years ago, those issues were still there. They were dealt with a bit differently. The mindset was a bit differently. I can remember my mother always saying, I found my great-grandfather, who was a slave, born in 1840, Smoke family, down in St. Matthews. And I remember her telling me that she had always been told, I'm going to see to it that you have more than I did and that you do more than I've done. And yet, as I look back on this, and I know this is what parents have said over the years, having so much sometimes makes us blind to what we really need to do to get ourselves on a firm foundation. And so consequently, the give me, and give it to me right now expectation that many of our young people have, and it's not all of them, but there are some who have that expectation. It's all they know, but it's what has been taught for years and years and years, and finally it's gotten to a point where reality is setting in, and I think that we're not able to shape and form our young people in a way, because they don't want that kind of oversight anymore. And maybe they shouldn't have it. You know, it's old-fashioned. It's considered to be, well, it's too much. I know what I'm doing. And I would just say that sometimes you do have to listen, because I can remember times when I didn't listen and things did not go well.
As far as the educational piece, growing up in a single-parent home, being raised by nothing but women, more so on the lower class level, just some of the struggles was just that input. You know, my mom being able to be there and be active and say, well, son, this is what you need to be focused on as far as your education, opposed to some of the counterparts where both their parents might have been active, been there, be in school, can tell you the importance of education and what you need to do to get to that next level. And just as far as the importance of having that background and having that knowledge to where, yeah, your road might be a little bit easier if you learn X, Y, Z, but not be able to have that really caused a struggle for me and majority of my family. We have limited college graduates on my side, but you know, like now my wife's a doctor, so you know I know the importance and the benefits that you can get from education. But what I really would like for folks to change is to educate me on the things that I can use outside of here, the things that I really need to know, not help me create debt. Educate me on what I'm gonna go through life, you know, how I'm gonna live and the struggles I'm gonna go through and taxes, and just not creating a hole for myself that when it's time for me to have my children, I can't dig them out of. So just educating them and putting forth the things that matter most.
All right, this next question, I'll lead in by saying it's going to be, when was your first experience of racism? My first experience of racism, I was 6 years old. I had a bad asthma attack and bronchitis. So my grandmother took me to the doctor's office in Sherrall, Dr. Thurkill office, and we went inside, and there were two different sections. I didn't pay any attention. I think I was 6 years old. So I remember saying, Grandma, why are we standing up? There's plenty of room over there, because I only saw a few people over there. And so me being the rambunctious kid, I started to go over there, and she snatched me back and said, we can't go over there. And then I noticed it was white people in the other office, on the other side of the waiting room, and it was black people that was full. So that was my first experience with racism, and it was pretty traumatic. So I'm do this purposely and start from the boomer generation and come back down, because I think you probably have a very different views of racism. So Jerry, if you would start.
Well, I would say probably when I was about 7 years old, my sister was 8, and my mother decided we were going to go down to Taps department store. Taps, I don't think doesn't exist anymore, but Taps department store downtown on Main Street. And so we went in Taps, and of course, all the heads were yanking around, and they were looking like, who, what, you know. So a sales lady came over to my mother and said, what are you doing in here? My mother said, excuse me? She said, I came in here to shop just like everybody else. And the woman said, well, do they work for you, these little girls? Do they work for you? So my mother said, work for me? She said, these are my children. So the lady told her, well, they can't come in here. So of course, they got into it again, and we ended up getting put out of the store. But the lesson I learned was that my mother wasn't going to stand for just us to be treated any kind of a way. And she was not going to ever back down. So the sales lady told her, she said, well, the reason that I even let you in here was because I thought you were Italian. And I guess that's just enough to say right there before I get mad.
Well, for me, there were two incidents. The very first incident, I think I was maybe 9 or 10 years old. I was at my grandmother's house in Sumter, and my brother and I, we would spend summers there. And we go to a gymnasium that's nearby. It's in the neighborhood. And I decided to take a break, go back home to my grandmother's house to grab a drink. And on my way to my grandmother's house, there was this white lady whom most people in the area knew was, I guess we'd say, mentally disabled. And so as I'm walking through the area, she growls at me, and then she begins to chase me. And so I then whip a quick U-turn, run back toward the gymnasium. She then realizing she wouldn't be able to catch up with me, she then just blurts out the N-word and said that she hopes that God strikes me down. And to be honest with you, I didn't really feel anything. I guess because I'd heard my uncles and aunts, and of course the guys playing basketball, dropped that word so many times that it didn't register at the moment. But fast forward to my senior year of high school, and I'm talking with the guidance counselor, and we're discussing some of my college options. And she was a white lady, and she looks at my GPA and my SAT score, and she tells me that I should not apply to the University of South Carolina. And she said that my daughter goes to the University of South Carolina, and her GPA is a little higher than yours, and her SAT score is higher than yours, and she hasn't done so well. Now, mind you, my SAT score and my GPA met the requirement to be eligible for admission into the University of South Carolina. But she told me that I should not apply, and she didn't think it was a good idea. She probably didn't realize that her daughter was maybe partying on Thursday nights, or maybe rather than studying and getting ready for exams, was doing other things. But that one actually struck a chord with me. That had an impact. Because I wondered to myself, why would she say that to me for any other reason than my skin color? But needless to say, I didn't take her advice. I applied to the University of South Carolina, got in, did very well during my time there. Not only did I graduate from the University of South Carolina, but I went on to the University of South Carolina School of Law, where I ultimately graduated a year early. So.
I think my first experience with racism and knowing it was racism was either first or third grade. I can't remember which grade it was because the background was the same. But in the morning before class, we would have to sit in the hall on the floor to be led into the classroom if you got there a little bit early. And I had a substitute teacher. My mother was very fond of putting my hair in ponytails. So I had ponytails in my hair, and lady comes up and she touches my hair. And my mom was very adamant, you don't let anybody play in your hair. So your child, adult, touches your hair, you try to be polite, you do the lean away thing, and I leaned away. And she said, oh, your hair is so pretty. And of course I said, thank you. And she said, well, what are you? And I was confused by the question. I didn't know what she meant, and I guess the confusion showed on my face. And she said, well, what are you? What race are you? And I looked at her and I said, well, I'm black. And she said, black people don't have hair like that. And she walked off. And I was taken aback because I thought my hair was normal And I remember telling my mom, and my mom was not very pleased with that particular conversation. But the most punitive example of racism I've experienced, I was in the 6th grade, and I had still have exceptionally bad asthma and allergies, and our band room flooded every time it rained, and it had carpet, so you can imagine the flooding, the mold, etc. And I sneezed constantly. I mean, one after the other. So my band instructor was trying to teach, and he couldn't get a word out because I sneezed. And he flipped and kicked me out of class, wrote me up, and sent me to the office. And I remember the assistant principal being kind of taken aback because I was never a child that got in any trouble. So for me to be called disruptive was alarming. And she asked, well, what did she do? And he's like, she was sneezing. And she looked at him and she was like, okay. And so she told me, hang out here. Don't worry, I'll talk to your parents. And I can remember there being a set of young white men in the classroom who were class clowns. I mean, they would knock over bandstands, giggle, laugh, be a general disruption, but he never kicked them out of class. And I got kicked out of class for sneezing. The assistant principal called my parents. My parents came to the school that day, and I do not know what they said to that man, but it got to the point where that man was afraid to even look at me, because whatever my parents said was quite clear. But the discussion later was, you were treated different because you were a little black girl and you dared to sneeze when he felt you should be silent. So,
Brian?
I would say one of my first experiences, well, the side of town I grew up on, we couldn't go too deep in the woods as children, playing because we was always told that there were rallies and different things of that nature going on back in the woods. We couldn't stay out too late. We could be outside, once it turned dark, but we couldn't leave from in front of the house because there were constantly fires burning and things of that nature. So it was always something going on that really limited what we could do as children on that side of town. But I would say that one of the most impactful things that happened to me was more so once I got to high school. I was actually riding with one of my friends to take his girlfriend home, and we went down this road, and he was just like, I need you to get down. I'm like, well, why do I need to get down? This is a different day and age. He's like, no, get down now. And I pretty much had to hide in the backseat of his car while he drove his girlfriend home. And you talking probably like 5 to 7 miles that I had to, duck down. And once he pulled inside her, into her driveway, he let her out. And then I had to wait till he got off that road and got back on the highway before I could pop my head back up. So for that really rubbed me the wrong way and really made me look at racism different. It's like, it could be in the late 2000s when you got to hide your head just to go down the street. That's a major problem.
Honestly, I can't remember a time in my younger years when I, experienced a form of racism that I could, distinguish from, regular experiences. But this year actually was the first time that I ever experienced racism where it just really, was like, wow, people still really think like this. In my English class, there were about a group of 8 of us, and there was only one white person. She was a girl. And there were black boys and girls in my group. But we were working on a specific project that had nothing to do with race or anything. And one day she just, started talking to us about Blue Lives Matter. Her dad was a cop. Well, he still is a cop. And, we got into that topic, and I generally don't like to have those kind of conversations with, others, because I don't want to get upset at what they have to say about it. So I leave it alone unless I'm talking to other African Americans. But, she stated her opinion on how she felt about the whole Black Lives Matter thing, and she said that she didn't support it, which it really blew us away because we're all black. Like, why would we side with you with your opinion when that movement is our movement? Like, it really blew us away. But we were going back and forth, and this whole thing happened for days upon days. And my dad used to be a police officer. He was a cop for like 12 years, and she brought up the whole gun thing, trying to compare our lives, and I'm like, you can't compare it. I do, well, I'm not gonna say I support blue lives, but I feel as if a blue life really isn't a thing, because you can take off a uniform at the end of the day. Your day ends, your blue life ends when you sign out and you punch that clock out. You can't change being black. So her trying to compare, what if your dad was to stop a person my color and he thought someone was getting a gun, that really boiled my blood, because you can't compare those two. Like, we have different experiences. Even though your dad is also a cop, my dad was too, we're still two different races. I'm pretty sure we have no common experiences in that lane. So that was my first time really experiencing something where I really had to, defend my people and defend myself and my beliefs.
I would like to respond to that too, Pastor Quick, and then Pastor Quick will give us some closing comments. We're just so thankful for you all and sharing with us on today. But my first experience of racism, I was in either the 4th or 5th grade in that town that you heard Overture talk about, Sumter, South Carolina, that's about 50 minutes east of here. I lived in an integrated neighborhood, so I played with kids from the white race. And my mom took me to Crest 5 and Dime, I think it was named, a dollar store, and there was a lunch counter. I saw the twins. The twins were two of the ones that I played with from on my street. And they were sitting and eating, and so my mom said she could buy me a soda pop, and then we needed to leave. I didn't understand what that was about, so when she bought it, before she knew it, I had gone over where the twins were. And before my mom could get to me to tell me to come on, then there was somebody white, one of the waitresses, who told me I could not sit. It was years afterward before I fully understood what that was about. But fast forward, I attended the University of South Carolina during the time you could count the number of black students there, and I ran into the twins. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a domestic worker or working in the canteen, but that's what they thought I was there for. When I told them that I was a student, when I saw them after that, they never spoke to me again.
Well, I want to thank everybody again for your courageous conversations today. I've been enlightened with the different generations and how we interacted, and I also hope that we will continue to discuss and have these courageous conversations on critical race theory. Thank y'all for joining us.
Greetings, I'm Reverend Antoinette Gabaton Moss, and thank you to Dr. Ashford for this commitment to social justice and encouraging the important discourse that is critical race theory. Alice Walker, the author of The Color Purple, once said the most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. There is power in the individual and collective voice to speak truth, and power in action to create a social change. And with the exploration of CRT is power in knowledge. This knowledge can dispel fear of the unknown, sheds light on the unwillingness to come to terms with history, which is American history, and break down social barriers and encourage mutual discourse and moral courage. Looking at CRT is a recognition that there is something bigger at play in society than personal bias and individual prejudices. In hearing the collective stories is the awareness that there's something embedded in systems and policies that is devaluing and disproportionately impacts Black and Brown people. Racial steering in housing, underfunded schools with a majority Black and Latinx population, food inequality within certain zip codes, disparity in pain assessment and treatment in healthcare, inequality in the workplace, voter suppression, And in the prison industrial system, where Black people constitute 30% of the prison population, but only 12% of the US population. All of these instances, and there are many more, are structural with a methodic effort to impede human agency. And what CRT does is focus on outcomes instead of individual ideas and beliefs, and invites these findings to be critically examined and hopefully move towards engagement for a more just and equitable change. In 2020, I launched the Black Community Watch Line in the state of New Jersey with other community leaders and volunteers to support members in the community and encourage accountability and draw attention to abuses of power. I'd like to show just a short clip of young people who desire to see change.
No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! No justice!
Hi, my name is Kate Atwater, and a time that I experienced racial abuse that stands out to me was when I was participating in a local youth group, and I overheard racist comments being made. Eventually one was made at me, and I was shocked and I didn't know how to respond appropriately. So if I had a resource like the Black Community Watch Line to advise me, that would have really made a difference in action I was able to take, because I just didn't feel empowered at the moment and I didn't know what to do.
When I see somebody being racist to one of my friends, first of all, it makes me angry that they think they can just do that. And also, it makes me really disappointed in people doing it and people like teachers who just watch it happen and pretend they can't do anything.
So the Black Community Watch Line is a free and confidential resource for members of the Black community to report and receive support in addressing anti-Black racial violence and abuse, with dispatchers available 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. And BCW identifies and captures data on racial violence and abuse in New Jersey and advocates for local officials to address these injustices with anti-racist policies and practices. Within that work, we hold to certain values. We believe Black and marginalized people have a right to life and equitable treatment. We're committed to anti-racist practices that challenge and expose individual, institutional, and structural racism. We work to support and advocate for every person with compassion and respect. And we build coalitions to work with for justice and fairness, which we've done in New Jersey with ACLU and with NAACP. And we believe in the agency and dignity of all Black people and marginalized people. Someone once asked me if I was involved in activism in college or if I majored in public policy, and I just told them I'm someone who just said yes to the work. And after learning about CRT, there are different entry points to engage. And it can start with sharing this knowledge with others and keeping space to ask, what can we do individually and collectively to bring about the change we long for? Thank you for this time, and God bless you.